So a lot of the military who travel in the regular army aren't exposed to all these challenges that the Green Berets are. Then they kind of had this image of what it was like to live there. And then, especially if they don't move near a base, they're going to come back and realize it's a lot more difficult than what they thought. And it's a lot different experience.
Greetings, friends. I'm James.
And I'm Randy. You're listening to the Passionately Wrong podcast, where we challenge your assumptions, offer some different perspectives, and hopefully help you make better decisions.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Passionately Wrong podcast. I'm James Bellertoe, and I'm here together with my co-host and friend, Rand Serlis. And today we're going to talk to you about a topic that many of you might have daydreamed about, some of you might have started to think actively about, and some of you might even be doing. But we hope it's going to be interesting to everyone, regardless of where you are in your state of thinking about this. And it is going to be retired military overseas. If you've been working in the military and retired from the military, what are your options for spending that retirement in a different place? Randy, you have a smile already on your face, and I wonder what it is that brought it there.
I mean, I wonder if we can't broaden it a little bit by Americans retiring overseas. I mean, the things that are explicit for military are very few.
How about this then? Let's broaden it even further and just say moving in retirement. Because I started out overseas and moved back to the US, and I suspect some of the same issues that we're going to discuss came up for us. So the idea is, if you are considering a move in retirement, whether it's a move from point A to point B, outside the US, back to the US, or for maybe more likely in the US, outside the US, both from a military and a civilian perspective. Let's see how much we can usefully cover, Randy. Sure. But I'll start by asking you a question. I presume this is something that maybe comes up a little bit more often for a person who served a career in the military, if not least of which because such people are maybe more used to having already served and lived in foreign countries. Am I wrong about that? But I mean, a person who's already broken the ice by being sent overseas or having spent time overseas might naturally occur to them to think about later also living there. Or is that not a correct assumption to make?
All right, we have to divide this up a little bit. So Green Berets, of which there are 20,000 maybe in the military, something like that. That sounds like a lot, but I think it's about right. Man, maybe close to 7,500. Let's call it 7,500. So 7,500 Green Berets. They cover the globe. There's a unit in charge of every continent, and they go back and forth between that continent for most of their careers, from 15 to 20 years. They tend to travel a lot, so they aren't home a lot to meet American women and date them as is normally fashionable because they're always traveling and gone. So a lot of them end up meeting foreign girls. I was in a unit that primarily went to South America. I'd say over 50% of the Green Berets are married to somebody from Puerto Rico, Mexico, and down. And the same thing could be said. I just talked to another SF guy about helping him write his book last night. He was from First Group. First Group is stationed near Seattle, and they're Asia. And he's married to an Asian girl. And that same thing goes with 10th Group, which is Europe, and they actually have an advanced. A third of their people are located in Germany. So as you can imagine, since they live in Germany and work out of Germany, they probably marry a lot of German girls. Maybe the Middle Eastern are a little bit less prone to, the ones that cover the Middle East are a little bit less prone to marry in that continent. And probably the ones that go to Africa are probably less inclined to marry Africans. But for the most part, those other three are a good 1/3 of them at least are marrying people from other countries. And most of the time, the retirement goes a lot farther in those countries. And they can get pretty much automatic residency because they've married into the country. So I think for us, who, I mean, I actually lived in Colombia for 4 years, and so one of my wives was Colombian. And then I met my wife here when I was walking through Spain, but she was from Romania, but she was in Europe, and I was in Italy for 4 years. So where there's a lot to be said about people being stationed overseas or spending a lot of time overseas and then wanting to continue and enjoy that life of travel adventure and new stuff and maybe a cheaper lifestyle that where your retirement can go a little bit farther. I would say the majority of the military retirements are pretty tough to live in today's economy in the United States, depending on where you live. But overseas, it seems to be a lot easier. And it's pretty easy for Americans to get, if you have some kind of income coming in, like a military retirement, you only need to show two times the minimum wage, which for most of Europe is around 1,200 euros. So if you can show you're making $2,500 a month, then they'll give you a visa. So I haven't been denied a visa yet. I've applied in 4 different European countries over the last 6 years, in France, Spain, Croatia, and Romania. All of them, France gave me one within a week. Spain's taken the longest. Romania took 30 days. Croatia took 30 days. They never blinked twice. I said, "Hey, freelance author, and here's proof of my military retirement." And they're like, "Sign right here. Here's your card." So if other Americans have a pension of some kind, or if they have rental property, they can show that they're getting a steady income of such amount, $2,500 is probably a good estimate. Or if they work online, they can prove that they're making a steady income over the last 2 or 3 years from that, or they have royalties or something like that, then it should be pretty easy to get. And most of these countries, like I'd say 50% of the countries I ever wanted to move to, I looked into it. They got the digital nomad visas. So if you don't, even if you don't want to live there for a long time, but you just want to stay there for a year or two and get a couple renewable digital nomad visas, you're just basically, hey, I want to live there for a year and I'll renew if I want to. I pay taxes in the United States. I bring my own health insurance to the table. I'm not using your social health insurance medicine. Then that's that's pretty easy too. And there's always people that will take your money to teach you how to do that.
I have a question for you, and then I want to summarize the key points that I think you just said, and then I'll add another question at the end to see about one more factor. Question is just, you mentioned something at the beginning about the special forces at least being stationed on every continent. I just wanted to double check whether you're reading that every continent. So Australia, Antarctica, the Arctic, or is it really the ones you mentioned? I'm not being pedantic. I'm just curious. Do we people who need to go to really remote place?
It's a good question. So I think first group covers Australia. Like the people that cover Asia are kind of include Australia into that thing. And I think if we dug into it, maybe someone's covering Antarctica or something. For if there's a purpose behind that, then maybe there is, and covering down on it and doing cold weather training in preparation for it. There's probably a team or two dedicated to it.
It wouldn't surprise me, actually.
I was thinking of the 5 main continents of
Yeah.
like the Middle East and Asia, Europe, Africa, and South America. And we have a command structure that covers North America, which is supposed to be Canada and Mexico as well. But the 7th group that covers South America and Central America would also covers down in Mexico, and I assume it would help in Canada as well.
All right. So a very broad scope of coverage, potentially everywhere.
So the intent, though, more than anything, while they do prep worst case scenarios in certain specific countries that look like problem areas, and we try to anticipate that a couple of years out, the intent is the unit that's assigned to that area of the world has people that speak the language and know the cultures because they've been back and forth to a variety of countries in that area. And so they would be able to react to, oh, I don't know, say a weird group of people decides to blow up our twin towers and hides out in Afghanistan. We would have people that speak Farsi or Pashto and have been to maybe Afghanistan or at least the neighboring countries so that we can facilitate either an attack or some kind of retribution if we needed to.
All right. So you've just anticipated one of my questions, and that is, if we're going over this list of factors that makes it more likely a person who had been working, at least in parts of the military, might consider living in retirement overseas. I wrote down this, Randy, that you've already had significant exposure to a country and a region. You just added you will probably speak one or more languages that are relevant to you. So that's a major hurdle for people, and I'll come to it on the civilian side. You've got social connections because you've been meeting and interacting with people locally, and there's a big chance you've met your spouse or partner. Then there are what I will summarize as economic factors and lifestyle factors. So the economic factors were you're relatively more wealthy and your income from your retirement is likely to go farther in most countries than it would in the United States. And by virtue of that, it's easier to get your visa, including all that under the economic factors. And then lifestyle was just a little bit the idea of continuing to have a lifestyle where you travel maybe more than people who are used to being domestically in the U.S. and like travel in the U.S., but it's a different kind of travel if you're overseas. So those are all factors that make it likely that this would be interesting to someone potentially.
I would add, I started this conversation. I divided it into two different sections. The Green Berets spend a lot of time in these countries, get taught languages by the military and know the cultures and maybe marry into the culture. The other side of that is the regular army, because we have bases in Germany, we have bases in Britain, we have bases that we share in Africa, we have bases in the Middle East, we have bases all over the world, and we have embassies where military people work out of as well. And a lot of the regular army may be exposed to, I mean, I see a lot of forums where people spent 3 or 4 years in Germany and loved it. The fact that they could travel and go to see all these places, they learned some German, they didn't marry anyone, they dated a girl for a little bit or something like that. But in those cases, they don't understand the hurdles initially to living overseas because they've been a little spoiled because they lived near a base or in a base and they had access to American movies, English, right? And they had access to a commissary that sold American food products. They had access to a PX post exchange that sold American clothes and electronics and stuff. Not that you can't buy a lot of that on the market, but it might be a little bit more taxed, a little bit more expensive. And the just the culture of being around a base and being able to use a base and being around people that spoke English and actually getting through life mostly without having to speak a foreign language is a lot different. If you move farther away from that base or to a country without a base, it's a lot different experience because you're going to get into civilians moving over and having to speak the language and get things done in the culture and not. So a lot of the military who travel in the regular army are exposed to all these challenges that the Green Berets are, then they kind of had this image of what it was like to live there. And then, especially if they don't move near a base, they're going to come back and realize it's a lot more difficult than what they thought. And it's a lot different experience.
Maybe a dumb question, Randy, but if you're a retired military and you move to a country that has a military base, are you allowed to go on to that base for any reason, or is it only for active military?
So there's a couple different flavors of retired military. There's non-retired military who are disabled, and we talked about disability, and they get a certain rating of 10 to 100%. And sometimes if you're 100%, you can go on. And sometimes if you're 100%, you can't go on. It's a lot of it depends on the SOFA agreement. You know what that is?
Status of forces agreement with the relevant local country.
So
Yeah.
basically, it's between our country and the resident country. And for instance, I have a base in Spain called a Rota Naval Base, I think it's called. It's in Rota. And it's about a 2-hour drive from here. And they have a post-exchange commissary, bowling alley, a library that with online library overdrive that I can borrow books from. And I could borrow books from any library in the Europe or in the military. And they also have planes that I can get on and take freedom flights back to the States if I want. If you rated the different kinds of people who are out of the military, I'm probably one of the highest categories. I'm actually retired. There's people that get out that don't retire, obviously. And I have 100% disability. And now I have a Spanish residency, which all works in my favor to give me different benefits. One of the benefits is the Rota airport has been downgraded as not a port of entry as of 2 years ago, which means if you're not a Spanish resident, you can't fly into it on a military air, but you can fly out of it because they want to make sure they know who's coming in their country. And if you can show a Spanish residency when you get on the plane in the States, they'll let you fly into Rota. So the fact that I have Spanish, nothing else. Doesn't matter if I was retired or anything else. Only the fact that I have a Spanish residency card. The fact that I'm 100%, I'm retired, and gives me access to the base. But some bases, it's up to the SOFA agreement, and it's up to the commander of the base what you have access to depending on your level, whether you're 100% disabled, actually retired, both, or whatever else. And so I cannot use the post exchange or the commissary on the base because the Spanish government doesn't get taxes if I buy stuff on that base. So they decided that's not to their advantage, and they don't want retirees they can't stop. I mean, almost every agreement will say, hey, any American government employee and active duty military who's working on the base can use, that's what it's for, the post exchange and the commissary, so they can use it. So that's non-negotiable. That's where the starting point is, right? And from there, it's okay. Can all of your Spanish employees use it, yes or no? And the country's got to decide. That's a benefit to the Spanish people that are working there. However, we don't get taxes from it. So do we want to do that? And then how about our retirees? And so that goes down. I think this is like a kind of a checklist for every SOFA agreement. Like we go down and say, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? And everyone checks yes or no. And then after all that's done with the SOFA agreement, the commander can also say yes or no, because there's only so much stuff on the ground in a post exchange and a commissary. And there's a bunch of people that work there that pretty much depend on it, and that have to because they were forced to work here. You know, they were told, hey, you're going to go work and row to Spain. And you're like, oh my God, I got to go to Spain. That sucks so bad. But but at least they have a commissary. I don't think anyone says that, but they depend, their families and them depend on the commissary and the post exchange to supplement whatever they're buying on the economy. And that's one of their benefits. And so if, for instance, Italy's got a huge expat population living around the bases, and like locusts, the retirees will get in there and take all the food off the shelves the day it arrives. And then all the active duty people who actually work during the day and can't even get there until the evening or weekends or something are like, there's nothing left. And so the commander can make the decision like, hey, can do like, actually the Road to Spain has once a month retirees are allowed to use the commissary. And they announce the day in a newsletter that you can sign up for. But in Italy, they may say, hey, until we figure this out, retirees chill out. You're not using the commissary until we look at a better, more equitable way to do this. And so that's kind of how it works. Every base is different. Every country is different. And there may be bases, 2 or 3 bases within the country that are different depending on what the commanders say.
So this may be a relevant factor to where a person is living. It probably isn't going to be a decisive factor in terms of I choose to go there just because of the setup at the base. The point about the ability to take a flight from a military base, I think you said free of charge. Is that something that you do also now in retirement, or would you do? I'm just curious. I know you've referred to doing it while you were serving, of course, that makes sense. But I'm just curious how important a topic that might be for some people.
This has flipped into just only military. We can do another one for civilians if it gets on longer. But so
Interesting.
The answer is retirees, but there is an order of preference, or I don't know, order of merit. Number 1, order of merit is if you're active duty, you actually have a mission to be on the plane to go, or you're a courier or something like that. Then it's like emergency leave. If you're on leave, you're not on a mission. So I think you're number 3 if you're on leave. But if you're on emergency leave because you had a death in the family or something like that, then you're like level 2. It's pretty easy to find on Google. I'm not making it up. I'm doing my best guess to remember. But basically, if you're on orders, if you're on emergency leave, if you're on normal leave with dependents, can go at level 3. If you're traveling with wife and kids and you're going to fly to Australia, which I have done, then you would be at number 3. And then number 4 is like dependents that are dependents of active duty that are flying by themselves. And then the last one is retirees. So basically, when you can't reserve a seat, active duty military on mission can reserve seats. So when I flew from the United States, Baltimore to Italy to start my job in Italy in 2016, January, I had a seat reserved 4 months out. When I got my orders, I went to the headquarters for the flight people and I said, "Hey, I want to take this because I got dogs and I don't want to pay for my dogs on a civilian flight." And they got so many dog slots on each military mission too. And so I got 2 dog spots reserved and I got a seat for myself and my family reserved on there 4 months out. And it was fine. It went straight. I had to figure out how to get to Baltimore, and the military paid me back for all those plane tickets and buses, trains, automobiles, whatever I had to do to get there. But once I got there, Baltimore, stopped in Germany, let the dogs out to pee, got back on, flew to Venice, got out, and then I got picked up there by my new unit, and they took us to the temporary hotel while I was looking for a house. So it was a pretty easy flight. Not too bad. Depending on the plane, they're super comfortable because you can get on I was getting on a rotator. So Germany has, I want to say twice a week, they have rotators that go from Baltimore. The one in Spain has a rotator twice a month that goes to Norfolk, Virginia. And so it's every month. I think it's like the second and the fourth Wednesday or whatever. So you can guarantee it's coming. What you can't guarantee is there's going to be a seat on there for you because it's mission prevalent, depending on what kind of people are PCSing or changing duty stations to start their new job somewhere, going back to the States or coming from the States. And so you can sign up as a retired person. You can sign up like 30 days out. And that just means that's the order as a retired person in level 6 that you're going to be looked at. And you can do the same thing as soon as you get leave papers. If you're going to go on vacation and active duty, you can send your leave form in there and sign up like 30 days out or something like that. And that just means you'll be in front of all the other people who are on vacation. So when you do this, you show up 24 hours out for roll call. I think it's 12 hours out. You show up for roll call and they call your name based on the list of people that turn their forms in, and they may have 34 seats. And so they call out people on leave in the military first and their family members. And then they call out other unaccompanied dependents. And then they call out whatever. And then they call out the retirees. And then when they get to 34 seats, they stop calling people. And they're like, "Okay, get your bag, get on the plane." And then everyone sits down and that if you're going to be on the next list. So the next one has 10 slots and they start going down again because more people might have showed up that were in higher levels than you. So you're still 6 levels. So if active duty people on vacation show up, they get the plane. When I flew to Australia, there was 8 seats. There was 2 families of 3 that were flying back from vacation to Japan. And they were flying to Hawaii. The route went Hawaii, New Zealand, Australia. And so in Hawaii, they were going to try to catch a different plane, but they got priority on this plane. So that was 6 seats. There was a courier. He was the 7th seat. And then there was a couple other people, like military people on vacation, but they're families of 3 and 4. There was only 1 seat left. I signed up a month earlier. And so I got the last seat. And then usually once you're on the plane, even though you change planes, you keep your seat. You're not giving your seat up, even if the other people are there want to go on it. So I kind of lucked out. I got on that one. And then, but nothing's for sure. You have to be flexible with your time. And so that's why a lot of people who are active duty can't do it. I mean, if you already have hotels on the other end somewhere and a plan to go do something, if you don't get on this plane, that's all messed up. So a lot of people won't. In my opinion, what I used to do was on the way there, I'd buy a one-way ticket, and then I'd plan so that I'd have maybe a week flexible time when I was single on the way back, so that I could miss planes and not get on all the planes. But because I was active duty, I was in the 3rd tier, and I usually got on a plane in a day or 2. So that's how I flew back and forth between Europe when I was a single guy during the 90s and early 2000s. I went to Australia, I went to UK, Spain, and that's pretty much it.
For the people who are in some form of retirement, I guess it could be useful depending on their proximity to a base and where they want to go, and then their flexibility, and then just a lot of luck and circumstance, I guess.
There's a great web page, and they send out a weekly or bi-monthly newsletter. It's called Pop and Smoke, and it's managed by a military spouse who was managing it for years while her husband was in the military, and then they retired 5 years ago. They actually retired and live in Rota, Spain, specifically because they wanted to use that to roam around. And I think they didn't go to Rota, Spain first. They went to Japan for a year with their kids, and now they live in Rota, Spain. And the whole thing is about how do people get visas to live overseas? How do they use they call it MAC flights, Military Air Command, the free MAC flights. How do you find the schedules? Her experience using it with her family, if they got bumped, where they stayed when they got bumped, different hotels they used. And she actually interviews people. And I interviewed, when I lived in Romania, she has a blog of interviews of people living overseas that are ex-military. So when I was living in Romania, she interviewed me and put my interview on there about living in Romania, how I got my visa in Romania, things like that. I actually got an email from someone like a month ago, and they just retired. And they're like, hey, we're thinking about going to Romania now. We saw your thing on Pop and Smoke, and we wanted to know if we could talk to you. So I got on the phone with them and talked to them about Romania. So it's a very interesting group of people that, especially military, that want to live overseas, and everyone's very open about, the pluses and minuses and how to get through the red tape and things like that. But yeah, I forget her name, the one that runs Pop and Smoke, but I mean, I've been subscribed to that for 10 years. I don't know. I feel like it's been open for 10 years, but for a long time, since before I got out.
For sure, that is going to be one of the bigger differences between the military retiree experience and the civilian experience. As I listen to you talk about this, for us right now in our early retirement, and partly due to our circumstances of needing to travel back and forth to Switzerland a fair amount, my biggest cost right now in retirement is air travel, and not a small number. And particularly a person was thinking they would retire overseas or to a country because of lower cost of living, you don't want to blow that by then having a significant amount of air travel expense. It might be that people find themselves largely staying put or only traveling locally once they get to a place if they don't have access to inexpensive or free travel. I'll make an observation, Randy, and then maybe we can generalize this, even if we do a follow-up from the civilian side. And that would be, we used to watch a show on British TV called A Place in the Sun. And it was mostly about British people leaving to go to someplace warm and the experience that they had in trying to build a new life in that place. Usually it was to another place in Europe, but not always. But just the point was going to somewhere where it was sunny and on a beach and people thought that they would have a nice lifestyle. Some were retired, didn't need to work. Others intended to work in their new location. And the part that I would say always struck us and made the show interesting is people had sometimes wildly unrealistic ideas about how their new life was going to be and how challenging it was to move from everything that you knew and understood to, now we're talking civilians, right? So they may or may not have had any exposure to living in Ibiza, Spain, other than the 2-week vacation they went one time and they thought, oh, this is great, I'll move here. They don't speak Spanish. They don't understand what it means to get a work visa, and really don't understand what it's going to be like to leave their friends and family behind and be pretty much all by themselves, all sorts of reasons for which their moves were more or less successful. And so maybe the question I would ask for you is, at a high level, based on your own experiences and the people that you interact with, what would be some success factors and some risk factors in terms of, if I look at this person or this setup, this is going to help make your move potentially a success, and there's some things to watch out for. I'd start with the language point, because you can live entirely in your, let's just say, English. There are expats and English-speaking people everywhere, but it's a very different type of experience for people who don't have even rudimentary language skills. It makes a lot of things harder as a resident. What else would you add to the list or emphasize as potential success factors, potential risk factors?
I would add to the language that I feel like there's a large amount of Americans haven't spent a lot of time overseas, and they just assume there's going to be someone around who will speak English, and that's not true. I mean, we just hired someone to help us clean the house. It's kind of a big house, and she came yesterday. She didn't speak a word of English, and she's in her 40s, and lived in Spain her whole life. She's Spanish. And that also goes with the bureaucracy. Like when I was getting my green card, when my wife was getting my green card, who doesn't speak a lick of Spanish, they wouldn't let me go in with her because she was getting her card, not I wasn't getting my card. And but the guy didn't speak any English. I mean, professional guy. I think he's a policeman actually. And they were doing that pointy talkie, and she finally like, wait 1 second, and she ran out and she grabbed me and the guard let me in. And by the time I got in there, I explained it. I knew what she said. We were progressing. I don't know what the problem was. Now, I knew what she wanted. He didn't understand what she said in English, and he didn't speak in English back to her, but he'd been doing the green card thing for so long. He knew people's problems were, and like, this form, you don't have this form. And I told her she didn't have this form. So anyway, but that one of the language things is don't expect them to speak English, especially when you're trying to get your visa and do your bureaucracy stuff and get signed into the country. And I think another misconception is taxes. I mean, I'm getting charged 50% taxes. So that covers my health insurance. But as a veteran, I have health insurance. So I don't really need health insurance, but it doesn't matter to them because I'm paying into their social medicine. And I also have to pay into their Social Security, even though I probably won't work for 15 years. I don't have to pay Social Security if I don't work, I don't think. But because I still work and I work as an author and editor, I have to pay Social Security. Social Security is charged in different categories depending on how much money you make. But I make just my retirement puts me over that. Now, they don't tax my retirement, but they use my retirement to put me in the bracket to charge me my Social Security. Even there, so because I'm in the highest bracket, I pay 700 euros a month or something, 650 euros a month just for Social Security. And on top of that, they charge 50% of taxes. And because of my retirement, even though they're not going to tax my retirement, if I made $1, they would charge me 50 cents because I'm in the highest bracket and I get charged 50%. So
Yeah, that's good. That's good info specifically on the tax point, Randy. The systems are different, almost guaranteed everywhere you go. And that's worth looking into before you've made the concrete steps to move to a place. I can tell you, for example, if you're in a place like Germany or Switzerland, the taxes are going to be similar to what you're describing in terms of marginal rates, very high and very surprising in some cases. The costs for social insurance in Switzerland, for example, you pay regardless of whether you're working, and you pay based on your assets and your retirement income. If you're our age, in your 50s, and you are ahead of the normal retirement age, you're going to keep on paying the full Social Security amount, and it's basically untenable for people who don't have a very significant source of income. So some countries, I would say that the local tax system, Social Security system, is going to make living there really not very attractive at all, if it's even possible. That's definitely a major success factor, risk factor.
If you retire and you're just living off your military retirement, and I met some people the other day, they're two military people married to each other. So they have a double retirement basically. And that's plenty of money to live. You can get a retirement visa with your retirement income, and you basically don't pay any taxes, and you pay taxes, whatever you have to pay in the United States. Doesn't matter what you pay in Spain, you're still going to pay United States taxes. They'll just deduct whatever you pay in Spain from that. And because you're paying such a high rate, you probably won't pay any. You just have to file the U.S. taxes. You probably won't pay any. So, and then most countries give you like 1 year, the first year or the second year. Like I say I'm paying 600 for Social Security because it's my first year here. I'm only paying like 50 for the first year. And then they assess me based on my income from the previous year, how much I'm going to pay for the second year. So I get to bypass this first year. We'll see what happens next year. So that's one thing. Second of all, there's something to be said about public transportation, that maybe you don't need a car if you live near or in a big city. But I don't. I live in the suburbs, and there's one bus that comes past my little village thing that goes to the city. It comes every hour, and it doesn't actually stop in my city. I have to call the day beforehand and say, I'm going to catch the bus tomorrow at this time, so the bus knows to stop, because it goes down a highway and it has to exit and pick me up. So that's the way my system works. Most countries, like I mean, I remember living in the Netherlands. That's a pretty robust system throughout the country. It doesn't matter if you're in a little village or not, you can get to a bus. I was really surprised about that this one, that this didn't have that, but it's the way it goes. That being said, gas is super expensive. So if you plan on driving a lot, you're going to be paying a lot more money than you would have paid in the United States. Like it's triple what's in the United States. So you get a budget for that. And there's taxes on your vehicle that are more than the United States as well. And also some countries don't have reciprocal driver's license. So France has a reciprocal driver's license. If you have a driver's license from certain state, not all of the states, certain states, and Texas is one of them, then you can turn that in within the first year of you arriving and getting a resident pass in France. If you turn it in, you will get a French one and reciprocally. And apparently Texas does that for the French too. Spain, on the other hand, does not have a Texas reciprocal driver's license. And in most of these countries, you don't just go to the DMV, sign up and say, hey, I'm a 50-year-old man. I'd like to take your test. I think I can pass it. You actually have to go to driver's training and prove that you went to driver's training for months. I don't actually know. I haven't investigated here because I'm not really interested in it, but eventually I probably will. But it's a month-long thing. I don't know what Switzerland was like, but Italy, I know Romania was like a 2-month course, and it costs a lot of money. The police, they have their car with double driver or steering wheels, double brakes and gas, so they can take charge if you're an idiot. And if you don't pass, then you have to do it. You get like another try, and then you have to go through the course again. And the course isn't cheap. So you might anticipate not being able to drive for the first 6 months you're here or something like that, because you have to figure out, and it's all in Spanish. So that's another problem. You have to be able to take the written test in Spanish and understand what the guy in the other seat's telling you to do.
Yeah, that's a really good one, Randy, because it's so important to quality of life. And in the US, you assume it's easy to get a license, you drive everywhere anyway. Both the thought that you might want to evaluate public transportation and the thought that your license isn't going to be transferable. Those are real issues. When we moved to Germany the first time, they didn't accept a New York license because of that weird thing with states. Some states have reciprocity and some don't. So I was like, all right, what do we do now? We lived in the city of Frankfurt, so I could get around with public transportation, but I still wanted my license so we could do trips and stuff. And they're like, yeah, you got to take the class just like everybody else. So go sign up. And it's like a 6-month thing. Germans are very strict on their driver's license. Holy cow. You got to take day classes, and night classes, and drive on the Autobahn. And then it's really? And they're like, yeah, really. I was like, oh, okay. So I did it. And then I had my German license, and I was very proud to have gotten it. Switzerland, much easier. They're like, yeah, fine, whatever. Give me your US license. Here's the Swiss license. Moving back to South Carolina, by the way, if you have a foreign license, and you've given up your US license, same question in reverse. South Carolina laughed at my Swiss license. Then that's not going to do you any good here whatsoever. As a matter of fact, they got up, the lady stood up in the office, the whole room full of 50 people, and said, this fool has a Swiss license. And they're all laughing. They were nice, but they're like, never seen that, not going to work. Do you have another one? That's worth thinking about. Yes, Randy. And just to mention it, something else you said, and it's maybe worth dwelling on for a moment. Again, this is mostly military focused, but you mentioned your military care is free. Is it free because the U.S. military pays for it, or because if you go to wherever you go, or do you have to go to a military hospital to get your care free? And just to heat that up, my second largest cost in retirement is healthcare, and it's a very significant cost. So this is a nice thing if you don't have to pay for it, but how does that work for you? A lot of countries have good socialized medicine, and it wouldn't be expensive if you were paying for it anyway locally. How does it work for you in Spain? I've heard Spain has relatively high quality care and it's not too expensive.
So let me finish off the driver's license story too. So if you're here, and that's another thing that the regular Army may not understand, because usually the SOFA agreements have,
But you can continue to use your license.
We will assign you some people for your base that will give you the test in English, and then we'll just give you the license. And you don't have to worry about taking the test. But it's a SOFA license. And so you get that. And if you don't have it, you're not allowed to drive. And if you get pulled over, you'll get arrested or fined or something, whatever they do here. And so that was in Italy, and every country's a little different. But most of the sofas will say, hey, our guys coming over from the United States for 3 years are going to have to drive to do their job. Therefore, how do we make that? They have driver's license, they have military driver's license and civilian driver's license from their state. How do we facilitate this so we can accomplish our mission here? Give us a break. And so usually there's some kind of agreement for the government employees in active duty. But if the people who made a conscious choice as they were getting out of the military to stay in Italy, most of them, while they were driving on their temporary SOFA license, they would take the lessons at night for the Italian license so they could have an Italian license. I would also think that I'm almost positive that all of the European countries are reciprocal. So if you had a German license, it seems like you could have flipped it over to a Swiss license, I think, no?
They were
Yeah.
relatively easy, yes. So you're right. If you had gotten your French one, for example, your Spanish one might have been easier.
Yeah. I thought about that. I still think about that. But also, I got some states will allow you to have two licenses. Like I have two Texas license. I said, hey, I'm living overseas right now, so can I have another license? Turn it in, and they said, yeah, here. So I have two Texas license. So I was allowed to turn one in, but still keep my Texas license when I go back to the States. Like, how are you driving in the States on your Swiss license?
That's actually super handy, Randy, because usually the requirement is that you can only have a license in one jurisdiction. So if you get another license, you have to give up your old one. So we had kept our New York license, which I had from before I left the first time. And then every couple of years, whenever it expired and I'd go back and visit my parents, I just kept using their address and I was able to renew my license. Not correct, not appropriate. I wouldn't recommend it, but that's what worked for us. So then when we came to South Carolina and they laughed at my Swiss license, I was like, how about this one? And they took the New York license, but I had to give it up. So now I've got just the one.
But I would say also most countries, like even most countries in Europe, will like, hey, 6 months, you can use your American license for 6 months.
Yeah, there's some grace period.
Yeah. And so I would say probably your Swiss license when the people who go to Orlando rent cars.
Exactly.
Anyway, going back to health care. So I'm retired military. I have TRICARE. I pay $200 a month I get some deductibles and stuff and with that, but it's pretty gracious. And I also have VA. If I was living in this US, the VA would cover me for 100% of all my problems, including dental. But when I live overseas, the way you get VA insurance is by filing a disability claim, and then they give you a rating from 10 to 100, and the amount of coverage you have at a VA hospital in the United States through the VA is dependent on that rating. If you have under 50%, they cover whatever injuries the military caused or as claimed. So if you have ringing in the ears or you have a bad knee, then they'll replace your knee. They'll give you hearing aids or something like that. The VA will to address those two problems. But then later on, if you break your arm, you need rehab, they're not going to do anything with that. If you have 50% or over, they just say, we're covering 100% of your problems. And if you have 100%, we'll cover 100% of your problems. We'll cover your family and we'll cover your dental. But when you go overseas, you fall under the Foreign Veteran Affairs or something like that. I forget what it's called. And they only address the problem. They don't take care of your family. They don't do dental overseas. They will address all the problems that are on your list of problems that gave you 100%. So in my case, I have both shoulders, both knees, my back, my neck, I got headaches. I got a lot of stuff on that list. I got probably 30 things on that list. Any of those things, if I get them addressed outside of the United States and I'm not using the VA, then I can pay up front and then file a claim and they'll pay me back. And I haven't heard too many problems with that. I've never used it. I've never been sick in overseas, thank God. Even when I had COVID, I wasn't going to go to the hospital. That seemed like in Romania, that seemed like a worse thing than to suffer it out at home at the time. But once again, it's up to the SOFA and it's up to the commander. Some bases, U.S. bases in Europe and around the world, will let retirees or 100 or disabled veterans use their hospital on a standby basis. So you call in there, you put your name down, you show up. If someone doesn't show up or if they have a place for you, then they'll stick you in there. And depending on the base and how many people are trying to use it, like Rhoda, when I was active duty, I was flying out of Rhoda to go back to the States with my family at the time, and my stepdaughter, who was on my healthcare, had an injury, and we went into the hospital, and it was empty. There was no one there. So, I mean, it's not a very populated base to begin with, but it has a hospital to support it. And so, in that case, that's a really good option. Whenever I had to go to the emergency room when I was in the military, even if I had a civilian hospital closer, I would always go to the military one because it was never full. I mean, every time to the military base, there was like maybe 2 people in the emergency room. But whenever I went to a civilian one, it was freaking full of people, and there was a big long wait unless you were really dying. So the healthcare for me is pay up front, and then I could file for TRICARE, which will cover it for everything with some deductibles, and for VA, it'll cover everything that I have on my list. I also was required for the first year I was here to buy private insurance here. So I have a Cease is the name of the company that I use, and I think I had to pay for my wife and I. So I paid like 3,000 for both of us for the year. And also, so now that I have a green card, I'm under the social system, which I haven't used, but there's a crap load of memes that talk about people turning into a skeleton waiting for an appointment. But I think it depends on where you're located. Obviously, some places probably have more coverage, like more doctors that are under the social medicine window, and there's less population. So the population to doctor ratio is better. So it all depends on where you are, how fast you get taken care of. I don't think anyone's complained about it. I haven't heard anybody complain about it. Most people have an additional coverage on top of it. Like they pay like a supplementary amount. They get a supplementary on top of the social. And then a lot of foreigners that have actually their own private insurance, like I'm paying for mine. They have a private insurance because they feel they either get better care or faster care or something like that. But none of it's super expensive. I mean, I'd say for 2 people, 3,000 a year, and there's no deductible with that. You're kind of full covered. I don't know if that covers hospital stays and stuff like that. And I know for a fact that Spain covers foreigners, tourists, visitors. Like my dad, when he was walking the Camino, had a really bad foot injury. He went in to get treated. They treated him. They gave him some medicine. They bound him up. They bandaged him up. And he's like, "How much?" He's like, "Nothing. We don't charge. We're not the U.S." That's exactly what they told him. "We're not the U.S. We don't charge you for medical care." He's like, "Cool. Bye."
All right, maybe we should probably think about wrapping this up. It's been good information, but I have 2 thoughts as a follow-on to that. We're not the US. I want to get a sense of the subjective factors. Even though it is subjective, I still think it'll be interesting to hear about the thought process a person goes through, and maybe you can only speak to yourself. Well, why does a person choose to live overseas? We talk a little bit about the reasons that it comes about at the beginning, but there's also the sort of attitude that you have about both your home country and your host country. I remember as a civilian, when we were living in a variety of different places, you're sort of in the worst of both worlds, if I can put it that way, because for an American at home who doesn't live outside the US or travel extensively outside the US, they understand if you want to take a week vacation to Paris or 2 weeks in Italy because your family came from Italy, that's fine. But then you come back and complain about how rude the waiters were and how expensive everything was. You don't go live there. And it says something to an average American when a person says, "I'm turning my back on the US. I'm going to go live in Spain." They're like, why? Why would you ever do that? You're leaving behind your country. You're leaving behind your friends. You're leaving behind the social network. What kind of weirdo, in other words, makes the choice to leave the US, not on vacation, but permanently? And then in your host country, they're looking at you also with a funny eye saying, "Hey, what kind of a weirdo leaves their home country, comes over here, takes jobs, compete?" There's attitudes that I'm not suggesting these are correct. I'm just saying they're not uncommon, that you get some strange ideas from people about what kind of a person would leave their home country and go to somewhere else. Have you encountered that? Maybe it's not so much an issue. And then maybe the follow-on factor is missing your home and your culture a factor for people to have end their experiment and say, "You know what? I thought this was going to be great, but turns out I miss going to Taco Bell," whatever it is that they really enjoyed about their US experience. So the subjective element, if you wouldn't mind commenting on that a little.
So I would say I fall under kind of I'm not sure why you went back to the States, so I might turn this back on you, but you spent most of your life out of the United States. I also, even though I was stationed in the United States for 2/3 of my career, let's say, of those years I was stationed in the States, those 20 some years, my house and my belongings were in the States. I normally spend 6 months of that outside of the United States in a temporary basis with a couple suitcases or a couple duffel bags or something, working or doing whatever I was working in the embassy or whatever. And then I had 2 tours. I had the 4-year tour in Colombia and the 4-year tour in Italy. I don't think it was a for me, and we both have families, our parents that traveled and took their family, and they were estranged from their parents who were in the States, I assume, the whole time, and so they are more maybe understanding than the first time parents would that yeah, I don't know about how your grandparents were, but, we didn't have smartphones back there, so it was like one phone call away
I, yeah,
and that was it. And then maybe every other summer we'd go back and see the family, and everyone would be like, What's going on? How do you live over there? What I mean, don't you do you have the big question? Don't they drive on the wrong side of the road over there in Holland? I was like, No. Pretty sure all of Europe drives on the wrong side of the road. No, it's just England. And they're like, You're wrong. I was like, I actually live there, so I'm not. But I've had people accuse me of being completely wrong about that a lot. I was like, most of the people that drive on the wrong side are on islands, so that's not a problem when you cross the border. There's a couple people that are not smart enough to do that, but most people are on islands. So I'd say the first part of the subjectivity of me, how can I live away? I would argue, what friends do I have in the States still? I mean, I have a bunch of military friends, but change my military friends every 3 years, moving to different bases, just like they did. So there's no place for me to go home where all my friends and family live. That which is different than I think a lot of civilians who set up shop in Atlanta for 20 years of their life where their kids go to high school, middle school, elementary school, college, and go out in the world. And you have made these friends through them, school, et cetera, your neighbors, same house when you lived in or whatever. I don't have that. I don't have no connections to any city in the United States. I never lived in a city longer than probably 4 years, and I moved every 3 or 4 years. And so none of my friends in the military, which is where I probably have the majority of my friends, live in the same place at all because they all, after they got out, they went to their hometowns or they moved to wherever their final resting place was to live. And so there's no place for me to go as far as that. So I'm not leaving that behind. The cultures, adapting to other cultures, we talked about that. I was trained to do it. And then, of course, I speak fluent Spanish, so adapting here is not difficult at all. And to tell you the truth, the Spanish people have got to be the friendliest people I've ever met. And that's not just me saying it. And my wife says it too. Like every time we go out, they're just a shining sun in a storm. I mean, it's crazy. No matter what job they're talking about, whether it's the grocery store or whatever, everyone's got a smile. Everyone's buenos dias. Everyone is very friendly. It's really stunning and nice. And in fact, my wife, who comes from Eastern Europe, where people are not normally very friendly, though they were always friendly to me, but to each other maybe. So she's kind of adapted that. So when people are just walking down the street or she goes into a store to get something and they're like, hola, she doesn't really have a normally high voice, but she'll go, hola. And I'm like, what the hell is that? She's what? I was like, you have a different voice for everybody else. It's really weird. So there's no, for me, it wasn't a problem. The language is a problem. I didn't speak Romanian, but Romania may be the last Eastern European country where everyone speaks English, to tell you the truth. The movies are English. They got TV channels that are English. It's like old Holland. I don't know if Holland's like that still, but like France, Germany, they're all dubbing stuff. Spain, they're dubbing stuff, but they still got they got the subtitles, and you can still go to movies. You can still watch TV. People in the supermarket are speaking English to you. I never had a problem communicating there ever, even though my Romanian was very weak. France, on the other hand, have a little snobbish attitude if you don't speak the language. In some places, where we were in the smaller villages, it wasn't so bad, and when I tried, they helped, so it wasn't horrible. Though I did find that I thought more people would speak English to help me out, but I'm not sure if they just didn't want to help me out or they didn't speak English. I could never figure that out. But and so why do I live in Spain instead of the United States? I mean, it's a complicated reason. I'm not sure my wife would be happy in the United States because she is super family oriented and her family would be very sad if she was that far away. Like us living here, she actually gets to go home. She goes home to Romania 2 or 3 times a year and her family comes here 2 or 3 times a year. And it's very healthy for both of them to have that because they have a very close relationship. I think my parents, having lived overseas, away from their parents and family for so long, are a lot more understandable. And of course, with the smartphones and the video, it's super easy to communicate, unlike years before. And so I think they're a lot more accepting to that. As they get older, I may change my mind about this story, but right now it seems to be working. I think my parents would like to see more of me. I didn't even go home. I haven't been home in 2 years, but I'm going to go home this year. And before that, I was going home at least once a year. So family and friends, not a big deal. Culture's not a big deal for me. We were just looking for someplace warm because Romania wasn't warm. We were stuck there for a couple years during COVID. Maybe this is something not a lot of people know, but you cannot immigrate to the United States. My wife can't immigrate to the United States unless she has a COVID shot, and she doesn't have a COVID shot. And so that's actually taking that off the table because it was a consideration for a while until they implemented that a couple of years ago, I think in 2022. And so it's part of the process to get a green card now.
Okay, you covered a lot of ground on that one. That last point, perhaps that will change at some point as COVID gets farther in the rearview mirror. The U.S. was very stubborn about it, though, during COVID and since, even in terms of letting its own citizens back in. So that is an interesting and important factor that changed the world just in the last few years.
Did you move back to the U.S.? Why didn't you stay in Europe?
I would say I identified with your discussion of asking the question, what's home, when you've lived in so many places. And I honestly would say I feel oftentimes more Swiss than American by virtue of the significant block of time that we spent there and raised family there and worked there. So for us, the main two factors were we considered it and still do a bit of an experiment. My wife spent longer in the US than I did, of course. And so had family here and I have parents, siblings here. So we thought, okay, that family factor was a new thing for us being away for all those years. We didn't spend much time with them like you every year, every other year. We see some of them. And for some of my brothers, I did much longer not seeing them. We thought, okay, while our kids are a little bit older and be starting to become independent, let's see how it is being closer to siblings and family and try and interact with them a bit more. So that was one factor. The other factor was culturally, our experience is that the Germanic cultures in Germany, where we were, and then Switzerland, they're a little bit reserved. It's hard to make close friends. And that's both a question of culture and also a question of language. We both speak German. We speak German well, but not as fluent as we do our native tongue. So we thought, let's see how the social engagement is when we are in the United States. And to your point about how friendly the Spanish are, A, I agree. And B, amazingly, the Southerners, at least here in South Carolina, where we are, ridiculously friendly, and we're finding it a very welcoming, nice atmosphere. So those are our main two factors. Try it out again a little bit, family, and then the social environment. I will say, in fairness, we didn't give up our Swiss presence either, right? But we have a house there, our kids are there. We know in the back of our minds that we can go back anytime. And so it didn't make this move seem quite as scary or permanent. We're like, yeah, let's just try it out. And if the US is as crazy as the newspapers suggest, then we probably won't stay. But guess what? The newspapers exaggerate and they don't reflect, I think, what life is like on the ground. And that's the other thing. You can, in this whole discussion, Randy, maybe we'll leave people with the impression you get from reading about a place online is not the same as you get from spending 2 weeks on vacation, which is not the same as what you're going to get living there. And if there's another way to spend more time in that area, rent an Airbnb and spend a month there, I'd recommend trying to do things to help give you a sense of what it's going to be like, not as a tourist, not as a temporary visitor, but really what are some of the things that are going to come up for you in daily life. And we've talked a lot about things to watch out for and downsides, but of course, a ton of people do this because it's deeply rewarding and enriching to spend time in other places, both living there and then traveling to them. So that's also not to be underestimated, is how fun it is to live in another place and to experience their culture firsthand. I mean, the times that my wife and I went to a yodel evening and were around people doing really cool local traditions, it just felt so special and nice to us. Those are experiences that are going to have an impact on your life. So these are reasons to consider it if you're on the fence. Lest we give you the wrong impression that it's all hard and hardship. There's tons and tons of upside if you have the right kind of mindset.
I mean, the good thing, if we're talking mostly to Americans, which I believe we are, with an American passport, you can go to most countries for at least 3 months. And so if you have the finances to pay for an Airbnb for two months or 2.5 months, and you want to travel to a couple different countries and try them out, that's probably the best way to do it. And I saw an interesting video, I think it was on Instagram. I follow these variety of American expats in Instagram. Most of them are like college student age and stuff like that, which are probably not the best ones to watch, but they're the ones that are putting out Instagrams. And I really think she misinterpreted. There's a couple problems with the forums that I follow. Some of them are like, hey, you can't beat the healthcare here. It's super expensive to be a part of it if you're not retired. If you're retired, it's not that expensive. But if you're working your butt,
Randy, I don't know what happened. I can't hear you anymore. If you're still here and we're still recording, I want to say Randy and I covered almost everything that we intended to cover. And although that's not how we normally want to end the session, that is how we're going to end today. Thanks, everybody, for listening. See you next time.
We'd love to hear what you think. Please comment on the show and share your thoughts. We read all the comments.
And thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.